I think that's very appropriate for the group we had together, okay? And in between John and I was another good friend. He always kept us cool, who was always calm, and that was Ted Ledoux. And Ted is here tonight also, and he was the guy that when we played, he was the one that made me run faster than I've ever run before. Because if we played football without equipment, he was big enough that I knew if he could catch me and tackle me, I was dust. So my speed is related to Ted Ledoux. Now, I brought this just for that very case. This is one of our trips we did together as kids. This is Ted on a trip to Cape Cod. And I'm the one on the far, your left. I think I got the biggest fish, though. I'm not sure. But this is what we did. I went through pictures to find what we were doing on this trip. And I found so many pictures of what my parents did as far as allowing us to branch out, to explore, to learn our lives on our own way. Literally, it was a day when we can kind of do anything and nobody worried about safety. My dad would come in from the road. For some reason, he'd drive right by Daring Spar. You remember Daring Spar was across the street over here? And he'd come up to me and say, now, Wayne, here's a quarter and here's a nickel. I want you to walk down to Daring Spar. Now, we're up on Pearl Street, and he wants me to walk, and he just drove by Daring Spar. I wasn't sure why he always did that, but that was my first hiking. I literally walked from Pearl down to Daring Spar, and I bought him one pack of Lucky Strikes, no filters, for 25 cents. The nickel he gave me, because at that time you could get one pack of baseball cards, 5 cards to a pack with bubble gum. That was my reward for walking to get him his Lucky Strikes. So having said that, I wasn't real bright back then. I may have been passing in school, but it took me at least 6 trips walking all the way to Daring Spar and back before I realized that I had been gifted a Columbia bike and I could have ridden down to Daring Spar and back. So you learn lessons as you go, and as I move on, I just realized that sometimes we learn good lessons, but all of them for me related to being out of doors. By 1953, my dad decided we were going to Florida. We took a trip down Highway 1 in a Pontiac station wagon all the way to Key West. It was an unbelievable experience. I'll never forget it. We came back, and Mrs. Graney, who was our teacher in first grade, she basically said, can we have a slideshow in our 3-room school? A little house in the prairie can brag about a 1-room schoolhouse. Upton always bragged about a 3-room schoolhouse, and we were lucky enough to attend all 3 grades. The day my father gave the slideshow, we had all 3 classes in first class there with Miss Graney. I was never so proud of my dad as when he was showing those slides to those kids who actually all paid attention. I was especially proud of him when he had worked so hard. He had taken every slide and put a metal frame around those slides, which really looked nice until you put them in the projector. So when you hit the button, they'd get hung. Everyone would get hung and hung. I don't know how he did it, because he had just gotten out of World War II. He was a naval transport air gunner on a transport. He came back with his mouth not always saying the right thing. He survived all that presentation without saying anything bad the whole time. I was very excited with that. A few years ago, my youngest son went off to Clemson, and all of a sudden I found myself with an empty nest. I was left with 2 cats who don't talk to me. But he did have a closet, and in that closet my mother had sent every piece of paper ever written about anything to do with the kids. One of it was a 3-ring binder, and I pulled it open one day, and when I opened it up, I realized that it was a notebook that I had created to not write down the requirements that I had to get my first Cub Scout badge. I looked at the thing, and the first entry on that was climbed Mount Monadnock, and it was dated June of 1955. I was 8 years old. And in my OCD mind, I said, wow, that's so exciting. I've got documentation of the first official hike I ever did. That is so cool. So I've got that stashed away. And of course, I immediately said, I want to document every hike I've ever done since then. Well, I found out in 2 seconds, I can't do that. It ain't going to happen. I don't remember it. So that was 1955. By 1960, I was fortunate enough to be in part of this 132, to be one of the scouts that went to Philmont, New Mexico. That was a 1-month trip to Philmont and Cimarron, New Mexico, and it involved 2 weeks of backpacking in the mountains of New Mexico. It was all scouting from all of Worcester County. I had the most unbelievably wonderful time. Coincidentally, at the same time, that was the year a new TV program came out named Bonanza. Wonderful program, in color. It was very cool. I had 3 friends, and they and I became the characters on Bonanza. I got to be Adam, wearing all black. That was very cool. But mostly, we spent a lot of time hiking, and I liked it so much that 2 years later, I went again in '62. As Scott has related, by '65, I was gone to Clemson. Clemson, I had not researched it, other than saying it was a great engineering school. And most important for my parents, it was much cheaper than any school up here, and that's what they could afford. So I went to Clemson. I did not know it was a military school. I did not research that. I also didn't know there weren't many women there. So I had about 5,000 people. Of them, they had just brought in women that first year. There were 200 of them at Clemson. We were in military barracks, no air conditioning, 167,000 degrees. And I found myself with my hair shaved completely bald. And I was like, at that time, one of the original Beatles. I had my hair over my ears. So this was a traumatic event for me. So in order to keep busy, the other Yankees and I, because we were in a very southern territory, we spent every weekend going up into the mountains, because Clemson is in the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was hiking paradise. It was before the days of trails, and we would spend every weekend going up and basically following fishing trails. Most of them went into the Chattooga River. You may have heard the Chattooga River. It's a wild, scenic river that runs between Georgia and South Carolina. And it became famous with the creation of a movie called Deliverance in 1972. Deliverance involved the playing of banjos and other things that we don't want to think about, but it made the place famous, but a great place to hike. So my 5 years there were spent that way, and by 1970, I graduated, and it was time for me to fulfill my obligation to the United States Army. Obviously, I was spent to a tropical paradise where we did a lot of walking in the woods, in the jungle, and I got many miles placed on my resume as I was over there. Obviously, it was not an easy time, but coming home was extreme. And I do want to thank the Historical Society for granting the general the opportunity to have these words, because overall, during those years, I have not heard too much about anything involving the Vietnam War. So I'm very appreciative of your words tonight. I'm very appreciative of the remembrance of Dickie, because it's never left me. For anybody that's experienced that, yes, it was hiking. Yes, I had a really heavy backpack on. But, for me, I think what Scott was saying was basically my radio operator, telephone operator, if you're in a functioning platoon in the bush, as a lieutenant, then you have a little command post with you, and it's made up of your medic, your platoon sergeant, and your radio telephone operator, who is at your hip every moment. Because if something happens, you are absolutely dependent on that man to establish communication to get artillery or gunships or whatever else you need help. The radio operator, to me, was one of the most heroic people of any platoon, because he hiked around with a radio with an antenna that was 2 or 3 feet over his head. We lost Rick, and it still massively affects me. Every November 6th, it affects me badly. We spent so many nights in the bush. He was from Pennsylvania, and every night he talked about his fiancée and the extent of the love he had for her. And his only dream was to be able to survive that year and make it home to her. And that did not happen. Several years later, there's a virtual Vietnam Wall, and it gives you the opportunity to get on there and give tributes, because I think probably some of the tributes you gave were coming from that wall. I did leave a message for Rick, and through that, his sister and his fiancée found me and contacted me. And probably for the last 30 years, we are in contact once a year, because they want to keep Rick's memory alive. And I want to keep Rick's memory alive. And I found one other, my machine gun operator has found me, and we together keep Rick's memory alive. So I do thank all of you for having that section of the hike in here tonight. Go ahead and bump that. This is me in Philmont, and I'm showing you that for one reason. This is 1960, and that's the kind of equipment we had at this point in time. This was heavy. This is wood frame. The backpack was heavy. The bag was heavy. It was tied with what we call a diamond hitch, ropes that came all the way down and back, and then it would come through the side, and you'd pull it to both sides, and that created a diamond, so it was called a diamond hitch. And that's how we carried our gear. If you needed to get in that bag to get something, it was going to take a while. You better not be hungry, or you better not need toilet paper, because you weren't going to get it too quick. So that's Philmont. So that's 1960, that hike. Yeah, go ahead. Once I got involved in my EMS work, I took it upon myself to join a mission group. And for 10 years, I traveled the world going on medical missions. It was the most rewarding 10 years I've ever spent, and it probably was one of the biggest things that gave me an appreciation of what we have here. And I will say to this day, I still have problems when I hear people complaining about what they've got, because I've been places where people absolutely have nothing. And in this case, when we spent our time there, this is in Honduras, and basically we stayed in the hooches with the families, and they were so excited to have us there. And so when we would do chores, we'd go out with them and do the chores. So in this case, the young boys and I would go out and catch firework wood at night. So this is Honduras. This is a trip to Zimbabwe, Africa. Unbelievable hiking. We had to do so much walking and hiking to get to the people who lived in the outskirts of these villages. Click it. This is Nicaragua. This picture was taken during if you remember, the Sandinista-Contra War. That was when the communists had taken over Nicaragua, and the Contras were the ones fighting the communists. We were working, taking care of people there, and one fella came to us one night and asked for help. He said, we need medical help. He was with the Contra fighting, and he asked us to go in with him. So we loaded up, one other fellow who had served in Vietnam and I loaded up medical supplies, because mostly what they wanted was foot care, like stuff like for your trench foot, clean socks, underwear, that kind of thing, and worm medicine. So we loaded up and we hiked about 10 miles into the Contra camp. I had pictures of that, which I kind of wanted to show you, but I couldn't find them. But that was an unbelievable experience. And it was also a very eerie experience, because as we were going, they were fighting nearby, and the sound of AK-47s going off was a little bit disturbing, having heard AK-47s in Vietnam. So hearing that, the communist weapon being fired, kind of set things back a little bit. This is back in Zambia, Africa. When I went over there, they were experiencing a massive cholera epidemic. The water was totally contaminated. People were dying by the dozens every day, and we walked into the middle of it. So we spent our entire time taking care of cholera patients, and every day surrounded by children, and every day surrounded by parents coming to us, begging us to bring their children to America. I had the same thing happen in Central America. Please bring our children with you when you go back home. That's very difficult to sit there and say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. But it was a very rewarding trip. We helped a lot of people. And the group I was with was wonderful, because they wouldn't go 1 year and never go back. They would go every year until the host country had built a clinic and could take care of the people themselves. That was unbelievable. This is what most of the children were dealing with. This is a child with worms. Bellies distended out to here. And the good thing about what we were able to do is the medicines we brought, it took care of whatever the problem was immediately. You could give them an antibiotic and 3 hours later they'd be better. They'd never had medicine in their system. So whatever medicine they gave them, we've kind of become immune to it because we take so much of it. But you could give them medicine and they'd come back later hugging your leg, or grabbing your hand and kissing it because they felt so much better. So it's a pretty amazing experience. By 2018, I finally decided it was time to retire. I'd been hiking forever. In 2003, I found myself a single divorced dad of a 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy.